Hi there, welcome to the program. It's Tom Jordan. A lot happening over the weekend. We'll get some headlines in just a moment, but guess what did not happen over the weekend? Yeah, not one net zero carbon dioxide mandate brought us any closer to saving the planet. Yeah, it didn't happen this weekend or the weekend prior to that, but they still keep implementing those mandates, don't they? Michigan's net zero mandates are not only not saving the planet, they're actually selling out its resources for profit and actually maybe harming the planet in the process of doing that as well. Selling it out for these. I want to show you what is being developed in the plans for this great state. Those things right there. Solar farms is what they call it. Solar farming is somehow considered the new environmentally friendly, socially acceptable, natural, earth loving way to create sustainable energy, except it's not. The state's approval to clear cut 420 acres of forest near Gaylord, Michigan, that's in the northern part of the Lower Peninsula, for solar panels is actually an environmental and economic contradiction. Forests, nature's most effective carbon removal tool, they say, they're being sacrificed for unreliable and inefficient energy sources that drive up costs and reduce energy stability. These solar and wind projects, they're touted as clean. They come with massive land use, shorter lifespans, toxic waste, unethical sourcing from foreign labor abuses, slave labor. Michigan's rush to meet these unrealistic mandates under Governor Gretchen Whitmer's My Healthy Climate Plan prioritizes optics over practical and reliable and ethical energy solutions. And it's time to expose this green illusion for what it is and demand policies that are rooted really in common sense, really environmental stewardship, the real kind, and energy independence. All of that is crucial. We're going to talk about that in a moment with Jason Hayes. He is the Director of Energy and Environmental Policy at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. He knows a lot about this stuff, and what he's going to reveal is quite amazing, actually. Just a reminder, we'd love for you to comment. You can ask questions, chime in somehow in the comment section. That's the how you do that. In the comment section of YouTube and Facebook and X, I'll get to those in a moment. Also, a reminder, the podcast lives on those platforms as well as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And the best way you can really help Tom Jordan Live is subscribe, click the notification bell. You've heard it time and again, but it really is the best way. It's free of charge, obviously. Just share the content, if you will. That'd be a tremendous, tremendous help. All right, these solar farms that are being planned for, I think, hundreds of thousands of acres in the state of Michigan. That's what the landscape will look like. Michigan's Department of Natural Resources, they've approved these plans to clear. By the way, they didn't agree with this latest plan that Governor Gretchen Whitmer put out there. But we'll get into that another time. I want to stay focused here. But they did approve, effectively, these plans to clear cut 420 acres of forest. So that's 420 acres. They still need hundreds of thousands more to do here. But this alone, clearing out a total forest near Gaylord, Michigan for a solar project, one of the dozens that are needed for what they plan to do for the solar projects, is raising a whole lot of very serious concerns about the state sacrificing its natural resources, trees and soil and water, all these concerns about it for questionable environmental gains. Will there be any gain? I don't think there is. In fact, I'm going to ask Jason Hayes in a moment. I'm going to ask him if the entire world went carbon neutral, the entire world, like renewable energy, to what degree would that bring down the global temperature? And he's got a pretty surprising answer, I would believe, because I know it as well. So we'll get to that in a moment. But first, all these questionable gains, because I don't think there really are any gains, environmentally speaking, by doing this. But our best natural defense against carbon emissions, it actually, what they want to do here with that, it completely undermines the goal of green energy. That's the contradiction. It undermines the goal. So Governor Whitmer's My Healthy Climate Plan mandates 100% carbon neutrality by 2050. 100%. Like, you cannot produce any carbon dioxide anywhere which, by the way, we'll get into this as well. Carbon dioxide is actually a very healthy gas. Plants need carbon dioxide to thrive. But these solar and wind projects are really more proving to be about political virtue signaling than practical solutions. Phrases like renewable and clean, they sound great, but in reality, they're not renewable, they're not clean, and they do mean higher costs, less reliable energy, and a shocking disregard for the environment in Michigan and the other states that are doing the same thing, by the way. It's a total disregard for their environmental causes. Manufacturing solar panels isn't clean. It's a dirty process, and it's powered largely by coal in places like where? China. In China is where they're going to be producing these solar panels. And so the environmental toll of production, coupled with the destruction of forest, makes these so-called green solutions a net negative for the planet, if you believe in that kind of stuff. So let's talk about that, the tens of thousands of acres of land required to do this, and what's wrong with carbon dioxide in the first place. Here's my conversation with Jason Hayes, the Director of Energy and Environmental Policy at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Okay, Jason Hayes is the Director of Energy and Environmental Policy for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy and joins me back in the program. Hey, Jason, it's good to see you. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate it. So I want to get this straight here. So the plan in Michigan is, deforestation to protect the environment. Is that what the plan is in the state of Michigan? What's going on here?
Yeah, in a nutshell, yes. Destroy the environment to protect the environment.
Hmm.
What we've done is we have lost track of what actually is required to protect the environment. We've focused solely on CO2 emissions, and we've started to believe the line that the best way to solve all of these problems is to just shut down every energy source that works and replace it with unreliable and expensive energy sources. Now, the ironic part of this one is that by logging the state's forests to replace it with a major solar, like a facility, they like to call them farms. They're not farms. They're industrial facilities, but what they're doing is they're actually removing the CO2 sequestering ability of trees. And so we actually wrote in the Detroit News here, it's published on Friday morning, that says a Harvard study that actually looked at this and said that large solar facilities that remove trees to place the solar facility actually do more harm. Now, recognizing that the researchers from Harvard are totally convinced that climate change is an existential threat and that we need to decarbonize. So, working from that perspective,
Yeah.
they are saying that you're removing CO2 sequestering ability from the natural environment. And as a result of that, you're doing more harm than good. So it's kind of ironic, amusing in an ironic sort of way that this is how state agencies whose job it is to protect the natural environment have chosen to manage these situations.
Yeah. Well, so trees were always, in the environmental movement. This was like it was almost like the logo for environmentalism, like protect the trees. And I can remember back in the 70s and the 80s, there were I'm not it's a pejorative now, but we used to call them tree huggers back there because they love
Yeah,
trees. And so it got to the point
right.
where they were putting in to prevent the logging of these trees and the cutting of them down. They would actively put in these metal barbs within the trees that once the loggers came
Yeah,
in with their chainsaws, that the shrapnel would come back and kill those people.
it would.
This is how much they wanted to protect the trees, because they
Correct.
said the trees are good for the environment. Here you have the same, I guess, mindset, the ideology, ostensibly wanting to protect the environment, and they're tearing down hundreds of acres of
Correct.
forest in order to pave the way for industry to replace it. So what's
Right.
really
That's
behind this, do you think?
That's the ironic twist that yes, the environmentalists have gone from tree spiking is the term that you're
Yes.
looking for.
Yep.
Interestingly, one of President Biden's appointees to the Bureau of Land Management was one of those people who was out
Gosh.
involved with spiking trees.
Wow.
But yeah, now they are doing that exact thing where they're cutting the trees down instead of protecting them. They used to have people who would camp out in the trees. I'm forgetting the lady's name, Julia Butterfly Smith or something like that, was the one who spent like 700 days in the top of a sequoia or one of the giant redwoods in California.
Yeah.
Now, instead of doing that sort of thing, they're again protecting the environment by knocking those trees down. In this case, the one in it's in Hayes Township near Gaylord, Michigan. They're planning to cut down 420 acres of. It's like a mixed kind of area. Some of it's treed, some of it's shrubby, some of it's open, but 400 acres plus, so that they can replace that currently natural area with solar facilities.
So, yeah, I remember I had to climb a tree one time to do an interview with someone who was sitting up there refusing to leave the tree. And all they're saying, all we're asking is give trees a chance. They were singing that song, changing the lyrics a little bit. And it was the person eventually came down. But that was the kind of the premise of this. And that's because they believe that, carbon dioxide is this existential threat to this planet. But,
Right.
but another thing that's ironic about this is that in the state of Michigan, and in these places like Gaylord, which I think they get about, 250 inches of snow a year, it's very cloudy up there. It's very cloudy throughout the state of Michigan. One of the
Right.
cloudiest areas in the state, and this is one of the cloudiest areas in the country. Why would the DNR consider putting in solar panels as a source of energy production in an area that rarely gets any sun?
Yes, I mean, it doesn't make sense. We have, if you look at energy, the EIA data, federal government data that explains something that's called capacity factor for solar panels. So that basically, to get capacity factor, you take the maximum amount that a generation technology, in this case, a solar panel, could produce in perfect conditions, and then divide into that the actual amount that it produces, and you get a kind of percentage, a ratio, and it's called capacity factor. And in Michigan, in December and January, solar panels they go down to a 6 to 7% capacity factor. So
Hmm.
94-ish% of the capacity that's available to produce electricity from those panels sits unused. If you think of it in terms of like your own personal health, if you've ever gone to a doctor in Michigan, they pretty much always tell you, look, you're probably going to have to supplement vitamin D because the sun that comes into the state is so limited in Michigan during the winter that you're not going to get enough vitamin D unless you're like sunbathing in the snow. You're probably not going to. So you're going to need to take some vitamin D tablets to make sure you're properly nourished. Okay, if you have to take supplements, vitamin D, because the sun is so limited in the winter in Michigan, that's just for you to stay alive and be healthy. How realistic is it to expect that solar panels are going to be able to somehow extract the sun that your body can't? Like it's nonsensical. And
It
we're
is.
spending hundreds
Well,
of millions, if not billions, on this kind of thing. And then the cherry on top of that Sunday there is that it makes our entire electric grid less reliable. So we described this in a report recently
mhm.
called Shorting the Great Lakes Grid, which is on the Mackinac Center's website. But we explained that it's not just Michigan that's looking at this sort of thing, it's all of the Great Lakes states. So we looked at the 7 states that surround Michigan that are all connected with or adjacent to the Great Lakes, and all of them are making the same plan. So when the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing, something the Germans referred to as Dunkelflaute, it's the dark doldrums. then wind and solar generation technologies are not going to be producing sufficient electricity to power our state. And they're not going to be producing sufficient to power Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, all of these states surrounding us. But yet, that's the grid that we work within, the region. It's called the Mid Continent Independent System Operator, or
Hmm.
MISO. It's a regional
Yeah.
grid operator that ensures that the area or region has affordable and reliable electricity. Well, the people at MISO are warning that the rush to decarbonize our electric grid is having material and severe impacts on grid reliability. So when you add all of these things together, things like we've already discussed, capacity factor and the cloud that's obvious in Michigan, and the fact that your body can't get vitamin D like it needs to, all of these things are telling us something very clear. But yet, the government agencies that are producing things like Gretchen Whitmer's My Healthy Climate Plan are not paying attention to those basic facts. And it's going to have profound negative impacts on the people of Michigan.
Even that initiative, the My Healthy Climate Plan, in it recommends staying away from land grabs here, to build these solar panel farms, or what do you want to call them, that you need to protect the land, and yet they're doing the opposite of that very
Right.
plan. What is the plan here? Because I know you've talked about this. I've been following you on X as well, and you've written about this now in the Detroit News on
Mhm.
this past Friday. It's in the editorial section there. But Michigan, I understand they've committed to getting to 60% of all of
Right.
its energy, this electricity supply from wind and solar in 10 years by 2035.
Yes.
What is the real? I guess is it realistic? And to do that, what would we have to do to reach that goal in a 10-year time frame?
Right. So, yes, they have committed to doing that. They passed legislation. It was in December 2023. It's now called Public Act 233 and Public Act 235 that mandate this. And 235 is the one that says we have to go from our current 15% renewable portfolio standard, which is we get 15% of our electricity supply from so-called renewable sources, which primarily is wind and solar. But by 2035, Public Act 235 says that we need to bump that to 60% renewable, which again is wind and solar primarily. By 2040, we have to have 100% in quotes clean energy sources providing our electricity. And so what that means is they've allowed for new nuclear, and also natural gas, but with the caveat that natural gas has to have 90% carbon capture on it. Now, that sounds fine, but the reality is that nowhere on the planet has any carbon capture facility achieved a 90% capture rate. So, what that means for the people of Michigan is we need to get our electricity by 2040 100% from wind, solar, small little amounts of hydro, and like landfill gas and that sort of thing, and then nuclear. And that's it, because we won't be able to use natural gas because we're restricted by the 90% carbon capture feature. Now, add in on top of that little bit of information the fact that Public Act 233 says that the Michigan Public Service Commission now has final say on when and where we're placing major wind and solar facilities. So in the past, townships and counties used to have a say in whether or not they wanted solar facilities to be put into their area. Now it's state agencies. So you have people like MPSC Chair Dan Scripps, who testified to, I believe it was a Senate Energy Committee last year, who said that we're going to have to use 209,000 acres of Michigan's land Now, that's 1/2 of 1%, they said, of the total land base, but people are up in arms over 420 acres.
Hmm.
We have to use 209,000, is what they're admitting. So when they're finished in Hayes Township, even if they don't do this 420-acre plot, they're coming to your backyard to get the other 200 and what is it, 8 208,000 and change to get the rest of it. So
Okay,
we're
that
nowhere
that's
near
obscene.
400.
So it
Right.
sounds like, you hear people say, well, you have to dream big in order to get great things accomplished. Well, to me, this sounds like a
Yes.
pipe dream, and it's
Right.
never going to come to fruition. And I don't think it's realistic. As you said, nobody has ever done this before. 208,000 acres in the state of Michigan. 400 acres is a very difficult thing to get past. I don't see how that
Right.
is going to happen in a 10-year period. I don't think it's realistic at all. But in order to do it, you have to be more authoritarian. You have to mandate these things just like they're
That's it.
doing now. That was something I
Exactly.
was really surprised that some people, even conservatives that I spoke to, had come out in support of this notion that the local control, the local jurisdictions need to be overridden by the state in order to put these kinds of, solar energy projects into these, backroom communities.
Right.
I just think it's a total violation of the Constitution. I mean, is there a judicial aspect to this? I mean, will there be any pushback from a Supreme Court when you look at the Constitution and local rights and individual civil liberties and property owner rights? That this will also be something develop a huge obstacle for this actually uh, this plan being played out in a 10-year period.
Yeah, there are groups in Michigan that are taking the whole issue to court. They tried to do a ballot initiative. They did not get enough signatures to do that. So another group is trying to do a court case to say that this giving this final say over to the Public Service Commission was effectively illegal. So now it's up to the courts. Will this be overturned? So, but yeah, if the Michigan Public Service Commission, the state agencies, are not able to have this kind of control, this final say, then you see what happens with a 420-acre parcel. Again, we have to do 209,000 to just meet that limit that Michigan Public Service Commission Chair Dan Scripps talked about. That's 60%. So we're going from 15%. We have to build 4 times more the amount of wind turbines and solar panels that we already have in the state. So if you've ever driven through the Thumb or Isabella County, or pick some spot that already has quite a few of these wind turbines and solar panels, you just start to get the very beginning taste. Like again, we have to do 400% above what we have. We're going from 15 to 60%. So we're going to have to carpet huge areas with these solar panels and wind turbines. So you haven't even begun to see what this will look like.
Yeah, it's going to
But it's
change
coming.
the landscape of Michigan and its lunacy because no one knows for sure if this is going to even work. And you mentioned Germany just a bit ago, but the
Mhm.
chickens really came home to roost in Germany when Russia invaded Ukraine because they had
Right.
in Germany depended on this kind of complete renewable energy policy driven programs. And
Right.
they are suffering as a result of it. For the last, whatever, 20 years, they started putting these in. And we're not paying
Right.
attention to MISO even. And MISO is warning, they have been warning for years, as you pointed out, that listen,
Correct.
this is going to destroy our energy grid here. This is
Yeah.
not likely going to work. But everyone is, I mean, in power, at least, they're not paying attention to these
Right.
warnings. That's that part of it. That's the energy reliability aspect of it, which, by the way, they're struggling with out in California, these high sunshine
Correct.
states. They're struggling with energy reliability as well. Just
Correct.
to think what it's going to be like in a cloudy state. But to the environmental factor here, what happens to if you do get 209,000 acres of solar panels and wind turbines? When that equipment starts to run down, what happens to that equipment? And is that in any way, any shape harmful to the environment?
Yeah, that's. I was debating an environmental activist on that. It's Delta PBS, the Mike Redford show, the follow up, in early December, and asked the same question. Like people are concerned about things like oil and gas wells. Okay, well, what about thousands, if not tens of thousands, of wind turbines that are leaching PFAS and BPA infused microplastics? Like, we're all supposed to be worried about plastic, right? The plastic pollution. Okay, well, these wind turbines, when you put the epoxies that you use to make the big blades, these blades that are longer than like a 737's wingspan,
Right.
they're they inevitably delaminate because friction from snow and wind and dust and all that sort of stuff. They will shed particles of plastics, and if we're worried about plastic, why are we not worried about things like, again, if you used it as an example to any other energy source, they would be worried if the same chemicals came from plastic that was being used in automobile manufacturing, or packaging for food, that sort of stuff. If you just tossed the plastic into a farm field and allowed it to leach those chemicals, again PFAS and BPA, into the farm soil, wouldn't the environmentalists be out there saying this is endangering our food supply?
Hmm.
You would think they would.
Hmm.
But when it comes to wind turbines leaching the exact same chemicals, thousands, tens of thousands of them across the country, why isn't that a problem? I don't understand, because we're still using that same soil to grow our food. And if
Yeah.
BPA from a cup is bad for us, why is BPA not bad for the food that we're growing in these soils? So yeah, there's again that irony, exactly what you talked about when you opened the show, this strange sort of like it doesn't match anymore. We used to tie ourselves to trees and drive spikes into trees to protect the environment, and now we just kind of go, it's for the greater good.
Yeah, a lot of it doesn't make sense, and when there's this many ironies, something is amiss here. And I think more and more Americans are becoming disillusioned to the what the narrative has been for so long regarding this whole issue here. And I think the pendulum is swinging the other way, because even when you look at the broader issue here, the notion that carbon dioxide is killing our planet right here because of global warming, ostensibly being caused by additional amounts of carbon dioxide and greenhouse
Right.
gases going into the air, methane from cows and humans too, right? But to that larger issue here, the whole premise of this argument as to why they're trying to do this anyway. What are your feelings based on your research and the data? Is carbon dioxide killing our planet? Is it that bad right now, or is there a possibility that carbon dioxide is actually good for the
Well, there
environment?
you go. That's so there are other much more intelligent people than me, people like Dr. William Happer,
Mhm.
who's a Princeton physicist,
Yes.
who's hundreds of published papers. He's worked in government and in academia. He specifically refers to CO2 as the gas of life. And anybody who remembers their grade 4 science knows that photosynthesis removes CO2 from the atmosphere and stores it in trees. They use the carbon to make basic sugars that they use to make the lignin that the tree uses to make cells. Like, okay,
Hmm.
this is how trees grow. So we sequester the CO2 into the trees, and then the tree respires, breathes out oxygen. So
Yeah.
this is how basic plant life, like again, this is grade 4 science. It's not terribly difficult stuff. This is how it all works. And so when we have more CO2 in the air, it's plant food. So can it impact the climate? Of course, yes, it absolutely does. But we've had, I don't know how many different examples. There was a paper that was just published recently. I believe it was in Nature magazine, but it showed that, again, the science that they published was that over the last 485 million years, there's been much hotter periods, and we're actually coming, out of the tail end of an ice age. So we're in a much colder period than has been on the planet previously over, hundreds of millions of years. So this is not unusual. It's not something that, kids need to lose sleep over. Can people impact the environment? Of course. But how much? And is it, as you said, a negative? Or could there actually be positives? If you look at what, for example, greenhouse owners do, they pump up the levels of CO2. They actually push in more CO2 into their greenhouses to make their plants grow faster. So instead of where right now in the atmosphere we have about 420 parts per million, 0.04% of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide. Greenhouse owners pump it up to about 1,000 or 1,200 parts per million. And in doing that, their plants grow faster, they grow better. And so this is, again, it's very basic science. We know that CO2 is plant food. And while it can have an impact on the climate, the reality is that the warming that we've seen associated with climate change has a lot of positives, and it's not all bad. It's not all
Yeah.
terrifying. So
No.
yeah, it's
My
not as
my
big a deal.
mother used to tell me when I was a kid, Tom, and she used to teach me, Tom, when you breathe in, you're bringing in oxygen. When you breathe out, you're breathing out carbon dioxide. So it's
Right.
good to speak to your plants in the house and to
Yes.
trees because carbon dioxide is very good for plant life. It makes things
Right.
greener and it's wonderful. I'm like, oh, that's good. So we would, as a little kid, speak to our plants in the house plants and
Right.
whatnot. Has anybody ever been able to figure out? I have never got an answer to this question, but has anybody figured out? Let's say we do all these 209,000 acres, we turn them all
Mm.
into solar panel, wind farms or whatever we want to call them, and that all becomes successful. It happens in every single state, and everybody now is driving only electric vehicle cars, no more gas-powered vehicles. Has anybody figured out if we do that, we spend the hundreds and hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars, maybe tens of trillions of dollars to get to that point? Have we figured out the positive impact on the climate that would have? Like by how many degrees would that reduce the warming on this
Yeah.
planet Earth?
Right. So there have been studies done by, like, if I encourage people to read it, Kevin Dioratna at the Heritage Foundation has done studies like this, and he used the same model that the federal government uses. It's called NEMS, but basically, he figured out that if the United States went to zero, like we even stopped, exhaling CO2, we would reduce overall world temperatures or impact the climate by, I believe it was, zero point zero 0.02 degrees Celsius.
Hmm.
So our impact is at best limited. And if we're actually concerned about stopping this, what we would do is use our foreign policy to encourage China and India to cut CO2 emissions, because over the past few decades, while we've been cutting our CO2 emissions, like the United States from our 2005 peak is down about 17 to 21%, depending on which expert you cite, but about 20% we've cut our CO2 emissions. Over the same period, China has radically increased its CO2 emissions. So if you look at what China is doing, they're building new coal plants. Like there are numbers, 1 to 2 plants every week that
Hmm.
they're either building or they have targeted for construction. Right now, where the United States has about 200, 220 gigawatts of operating coal plants, then China has close to 1,100 gigawatts of operating coal plants. They have about 5 times what we have, and they have in the queue to build about another 200 to 250 gigawatts. So they'll be at 6x what the United States is.
Yeah.
And anything that we do is just completely eclipsed by China. And then India is doing much the same sort of thing. So those two nations, China and India, are focused on ensuring that their citizens have reliable and affordable electricity. And
Hmm.
amusingly, China uses that coal fired electricity to build the solar panels that we're now installing over here so we can tell ourselves how green, like we're patting ourselves on the back, telling ourselves how green and morally pure we are. But that China's using coal to build the solar panels that we're installing over here. So
Yep.
they have reliable, affordable
Hmm. Yeah.
electricity that's all coal fired. And we
Yeah.
have unreliable, expensive electricity that's built using coal. And we pretend that we're somehow
Yeah.
purer.
Yeah, and then China ends up controlling the world based on that one fact alone, that they're going to be energy dominant. And Jennifer Granholm, the energy secretary, she's telling local stations in Detroit, Michigan, that actually, if we go all in on renewable energy, we will be able to become energy independent and decouple ourselves from China, when the exact reverse is the case.
Right.
Governor Whitmer said the same thing pretty much
Right.
effectively. Where can people get in on this? I know I think the Department of Natural Resources, they're having like a 90-day public comment period because there's been so much pushback against this
Right.
420-acre potential land grab for solar panels. Do you know about that? I mean, what's the best thing that you and I as citizens can do?
I know if you want to comment on that, then you can go through the DNR's website to do that. So the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, I know you can comment on that. Plus, there are several different elected officials, House reps, Senate. There are several senators. If you look on sources, social media sources like Facebook or X or Twitter, those kind of things, look for your elected officials. Almost all of them, or several of them, are now saying, we want you to contact us to let us know how you feel about that. I know Senator Lana Tice has
Yeah.
posted things like that,
Hmm.
and then others, especially those from the Gaylord area, the elected officials there, House reps there, have done the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's definitely it's possible to get out and contact your elected officials. So
Yeah.
if you can't find it on social media, you can definitely find how to contact your elected officials looking on like the Michigan legislature's website. And so you
Yeah.
can let them know, are you for this or are you against it, and why? So there's definitely ways for you to reach out and let whether it's elected officials or state agencies know how
Yeah.
you feel about this.
Wonderful. And to best understand the why you might be opposed to this, it's best to read what Jason Hayes has been putting out on the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. A lot of great research there, and also your latest piece in the Detroit News from Friday. I can't thank you
Yeah.
enough for speaking out about this, and it's common sense, and it's really from a logical perspective, using the data that backs up all of your arguments that you're right about. Jason Hayes, Director of Energy and Environmental Policy at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Jason, it's good to see you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure.
Knows his stuff, Jason Hayes does, as does everybody at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. We have a few comments here. I want to get to those, then I'm going to get into some of my own comments on this, and then talk about some headlines about what's happening out west and some of the reaction from Hollywood as well. But let's start with Cameron Harris bringing this up. Taz is back. Hi, Taz. This is madness. We are a cloudy state. The ROI, return on investment, is suspect to say the least. Who is getting a kickback? Or are our Michigan leaders exempt from FOIA? Yeah, you know the answer to that last one. They are exempt from FOIA. The governor and the Senate and the House, they still haven't fixed it. Seems easy enough to fix. Just pass a law, right? If you keep saying, we want to fix the Freedom of Information Act, it's entirely in your hands to do so. Just pass a law. That's what you do as lawmakers. And then the governor signs the law if they really care about this. Oh, it's more complex than that, Tom. No, it's really not. If transparency is important to you, you will allow the Freedom of Information Act to be enacted in your state. But in terms of the kickbacks, so here's the deal. And Jason Hayes spoke about this, but the Inflation Reduction Act, remember that was signed into law by President Joe Biden. There are 400 or more than that It wasn't Inflation Reduction. It was all about green energy profits and picking winners and losers in various energy industries. If their goal is carbon dioxide free Earth, then they're going to get millions and maybe tens of millions, maybe billions of dollars. That is where the kickbacks are coming from. So Michigan gets a little pot of that money, and then they spread it around. And everyone, of course, when you got tens of billions or maybe hundreds of billions of dollars available, well, suddenly everybody gets really interested in green energy. This is going to, we're going to go with a narrative. This is going to help us. It's going to fix the planet, and it's going to turn everything around. And if you say that enough, people will believe it, and you're pocketing billions of dollars. That's what's happening here. And they have basically they're pulling the strings here on this because they've got the money to do so. They control the media, they can advertise, and advertisers are very attractive to newsrooms because that's how they fund their newsrooms. And hey, we got to kind of fall in line here. So a lot of stakeholders involved in this when it comes to these hundreds of billions of dollars that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris put through with a very radical Democratic-controlled House and Senate at the time. And then they're distributing to all these states. And that's why we're doing this. Well, that is why this is so hypocritical, because tearing down 420 acres of beautiful forest, and the Department of Natural Resources approves it by not protecting the natural resources for very destructive solar panel farms. It is not good for the environment. It is not good for the climate, as they say. It won't do anything whatsoever except make a lot of people very rich and a lot of other people very poor. And that's the part I'm very concerned about. If people want to get wealthy, that's fine. But if you're doing it on the backs of people, making them poor in order to do it and putting your energy grid at risk, which everybody knows that's going to happen, they're just not talking about it because there's a lot of money at stake. So that's what's going on here. Appreciate it very much for that comment. Let's bring up another one here. Let's start. Jim Chikowski is back. Hey, climate change is a hoax. Michigan was covered in ice 10,000 years ago. Glaciers down from the Canadian Shield upon melting gave us the Great Lakes. Exactly. No man-made interference was present at that time. You're correct. I've believed this is a hoax for many, many years. I think we're going on decades now that I believe this. I bought into it in the 80s. I just thought it was science. And then you looked at the lack of science in order to make these arguments. You're like, wow. And for me, it started with the ozone layer. I was told, I was just talking to Cameron Harris, my buddy in the back, our director, an all-around good guy, about what happened in the 80s and how, you weren't allowed to spray aerosols because I was directly going up into our atmosphere and creating a hole in the atmosphere. And it was killing our planet. I bought into that and realized, wait, actually, it closed by itself. And there's a lot of other reasons for it. And even recently, there was a member of Congress, I won't say her name, she has blonde hair, she's in Michigan, so that probably gives it away, and this is she, told me that, asked her the same question I asked Jason Hayes about, okay, what effect do all of these things have on the climate or global temperatures? Because I knew the answer was pretty much zero. It has zero impact whatsoever. And she said, no, it's already having an impact. The switch over to electric vehicles is what she was referencing. The switch to electric vehicles has closed the hole in the ozone. It's just a total untruth. That was not true whatsoever. That little hole they talked about in the 80s has been closed for long before the EV thing came around. So that's just the dishonesty that seems to be happening. Maybe it's just ignorance. We don't really know what we're talking about, but we're going to feign that we do. We're going to feign expertise on this very controversial issue. All right, let's bring up another one here. Jim, thanks for that comment. Harry Sakalian is back. Hey, Harry. Hi, Tom. Why is it that we cannot get DTE, consumers' power, consumers' energy, and our legislators to respond in plain English to Mr. Hayes' concerns about the problems with solar and wind power? Thanks, Harry. Well, it's because of the money involved. And I'm pretty much aware that the folks over at some of these energy companies aren't really fond of me personally. I can tell by the tone when I've called their offices in the past to do good stories on energy. And But that being a separate issue, that's an aside. It's money. Money is involved here. These are businesses, and they have a monopoly on the state. There are only two main energy options in the state of Michigan, and they're primarily in different regions. And so they make so much money. They have control essentially of the rates and how much they go up, and you don't have any other options really. If you want effective energy in your house, if you want heat in the winter and cool air conditionings in the summer, you're going to just pay what they tell you to pay, and that's about it. Or they'll turn it off. And so they're businesses, and there's a lot of money at stake. And when you say, the government says, "Hey, DTE," or "Hey, Consumers Energy, if you stop building coal plants, then we'll give you this much money." It's these kind of subsidies to do green energy initiatives that really make us less energy independent and less energy secure. So that's what it is. It's just I don't think they want to be exactly open about. I mean, you look at their commercials; it's all about the wonders of clean energy and these turbines and these windmills that they look nice. They look like they're energy efficient and good for the environment, but they're not. That's just a fact. All right, let's take another comment or question. This is Mac Ski. Hey, buddy. You look a lot like a hamster. I'm just saying. Or is it a guinea pig? I don't know. Wind turbines destroy the ecosystem and are a fire hazard and extremely expensive. Yes, they are, Mac. You got that right. They're very expensive. They're very large. And what happens when they break down and they begin to not decompose, but you know what I mean? They deconstruct, I guess. Where are you going to put them? You're going to bury them? You're going to put them in the soil as they leach the PFAS and the plastics that are involved in this and all the other chemicals that are used to make those things in other countries that are using child labor and slave labor to build these things and to acquire the necessary components. So yeah, it's a ruse. It's not really energy independent, and it's not good for the environment. My opinion, I used to live very, very close to a massive a wind farm, turbine farm out in California, out in the desert out there. And it was, the environmentalists were actually pretty unhappy about those things. All the birds they were killing, the fringed-toed lizard that was dying as a result of those things. So anyway, thanks for that. Appreciate it. Mac Ski, first time commenter, I believe. Let's bring up another one here, and then I'll get to some top stories. The engineer is back. What up, buddy? Good to see you, the engineer. Would anybody from the governor's administration be willing to debate this topic on your show? Good question. I don't think Governor Whitmer would want to come on my show. She's made that clear in my previous show. I don't know. I'll look into that, the engineer. It'd be nice. It would actually be very nice to have two people on both sides of this issue to have an honest debate. We got two chairs that are available in the studio. Put one on one side here, one on the other. We can have a nice civil discourse about this issue. You can say all the things you want on one side. The other person can say all they want. I'll ask the questions. I'll moderate it. I'm not an expert in this in terms of like science and all that. I just read, which we all can do, and try to listen. And over time, I've made up my mind about what's really going on in this long, simmering debate for the past several decades as I've watched this. And I've switched my position on this based on the data, the science, and the lunacy, and all the failed, prophecies, I guess, if you want to call it that. People keep saying that the world's going to end in 12 years, and 5 years, and 7 years. We're going to have, rising sea levels, and it's going to. It never happens. Never has it happened. Not even once. Since the 70s, when they've been saying this, since I was a little kid, never once has it happened. So, let's bring up one more, and then I want to get to headlines real quick. Let's go to who are we going to go to? Charles Beatty. Hey, Charles, good to see you. This goes along the lines of the story in Michigan. News source about the corruption in the MEDC, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Yeah, we've got to deal with the MEDC because they're allowing all of these subsidies to go out, and they're also the ones that are signing these non-disclosure agreements and involving elected leaders to join them in these NDAs with these other corporations. And there's just a lot of stuff that's being hidden from you and me. We would like to see. MEDC doesn't seem to be. I used to like them too. I changed my opinion on MEDC. So there, Charles, good to see you. Thanks so much. Let's talk a little bit. I was going to get into some more comments on this, but I think we got the gist here. This is environmental hypocrisy at its worst. Forests are nature's most efficient carbon capturing machines. It far surpasses the capabilities of solar panels. So if you clear cut 420 acres a forest, it undermines any claim that these projects are about saving the planet. They're not. It's all about money. It's all about profit. It's all about the money grab that's out there. It turns into a land grab, and it hurts the environment. It doesn't do anything to make any dent in climate change, which, by the way, nobody ever can. The climate is always changing, as our previous commenter said. The Great Lakes, where did they come from? They came from glaciers, which somehow melted long before we started driving gas cars. All right, now to the wildfires. You know, there are dozens dead there now in California. Tens of thousands of acres have been burned. Thousands of structures have been decimated by this. It is historic, and it's troubling to watch what's happening there. And really, after decades of mismanagement, that has been followed by a growing number of devastating fires in California from these policies that really put people's lives and property at risk. And now finally, Hollywood is furious, and they're speaking. Now, we got actor Dean Cain. I want to show you this. He says he believes these fires will change the state's perspective on who they put into office.
It's one thing to vote, you know, the feel-good votes and blah, 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 when it doesn't affect you. And that's kind of what Hollywood has done. They voted for all these things that really don't affect the folks that are making the money and making the movies and doing these things. They don't affect you. But when it does affect you, you can't get a permit to rebuild, or your house burns down, or people loot your home afterwards. Suddenly, you love the police, you love the firefighters, you love people that you've been denigrating for years. And you want common sense policy. I can't get a permit to rebuild. This is crazy. Yes, it's been that way, and we've been screaming and shouting and sounding the alarm. So once it affects you, your votes change. And I think this is going to turn a very, very blue state much more red. I'm hoping California becomes purple, and I'm hoping that, listen, my heart goes out to those who've lost everything, and I know they're going to go through years and years of red tape, nightmare, memories gone. It's going to be one of those catastrophic events in their lives, and I hope that this will wake up people so they'll start voting for policies that make sense, common sense.
Yeah, we hope so. This is going to be a long simmering situation. You know, I was going to say I hope they don't have short memories, but they won't, because Pacific Palisades is destroyed. And many of in Malibu and all these very wealthy areas, and the wealthy elite are the ones who have the loudest voices, and I think they're now going to be screaming for many years to come. And they're devastating, and it's very concerning because it looks like Santa Ana winds are returning. And Governor Gavin Newsom out there, he announced yesterday that fire crews, now they are preparing for the Santa Ana winds, and they are pre-positioning their resources ahead of the powerful Santa Anas that are predicted from really today through Wednesday. These winds are going to be coming roaring back through there again. And he was standing in this place called Mandeville Canyon. This is a very embattled Democrat right now. He seems to be fighting for his very political survival, because he's putting on websites now how he's right and everyone else is wrong about whose fault this is. And so he's out there and he says, California's preparations are underway. Critics are saying, his leadership obviously has left the state ill-equipped to handle such a disaster. This is true. It was Gavin Newsom, it was Jerry Brown before him, and frankly, the environmentalists who control that state have prohibited a lot of the brush clearing and the water from flowing in there because of, they say, protecting the environment. Well, look at that environment right there. Does that look protected to you? So the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire, which erupted, it's almost a week ago, last Tuesday, they burned nearly 40,000 acres at this point combined, and the destruction in their wake. I mean, we're talking about, so just the Palisades fire right now, it's just 13% contained. They have a lot of work to do. 13% contained. And now we got the Santa Ana winds returning today. And the Palisades fire has already claimed 8 lives. Countless homes in and near Pacific Palisades have been destroyed as well. The Eaton fire has been more lethal. The Eaton fire has caused 16 deaths, at least, and 14,000 acres. That's near Pasadena. Containment there is under 30%. It's brutal. Meantime, the smaller Hearst fire near Sylmar, that's 89% contained, thankfully. That's burned almost 800 acres. But listen, despite all these efforts, the causes of these fires remains under investigation. And remember, when it's so dry like that, it just takes a spark. It can be from a car. It can be from a lawnmower to ignite the brush like it does. So it may not be arson. It might. Former Los Angeles mayoral candidate Rick Caruso, he stepped in. He's pledging $5 million to the Los Angeles Fire Department Foundation to address what he called the department's under-resourced state due to budget deficits. And Caruso, he should have been the guy who won that election against Karen Bass. He's urging others to contribute as well. He wants to raise $20 million for critical equipment that's needed and frontline support. You know, the budget was cut, was it $17 million? So he wants to raise 20 to help fill the gap and then some. So again, with more than 12,000 structures that have been destroyed, at least 24 lives have been lost. There's a lot of people still missing too. And a lot of people are questioning whether California's wildfire strategies are failing. I'm not wondering. I think they have failed, and they've been doing this for some time. This just happens to be the biggest one that we've seen, and that's why it's garnering so much more attention than these other fires that have destroyed a lot and growing numbers of properties destroyed. I think because of mismanagement. When the population grows, you got to make the conditions good for the population that has grown. We're going to leave it there for right now. I want to thank you for watching today's program. Please share the content if you could. I would really appreciate that. Our entire team here at Tom Jordan Live would love that. Go to TomJordanLive.com. You can see all the platforms we are engaged with. It's, of course, Facebook and YouTube and X, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And you can always comment. We'll respond to you as well via social media and email as well. I believe it's info@wayneradio.com. In any case, go to TomJordanLive.com. You can find out a whole lot more. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. God bless you. We'll see you back here tomorrow.